So this is kind of a broad stroke approach to really outline the process that we kind of went through over the past 12 months to really drive business value through AI-enabled projects. I think AI is definitely kind of like the hot buzzwords these days, but practically what that means or how you get started is actually quite simple. We started with mapping out our key processes across functions, whether it's customer service, sales, finance, legal, marketing, and then kind of really review what are the steps of each process and what are the bottlenecks. A lot of these processes haven't been touched in a very long time. And so it was actually a really great opportunity to ask ourselves some challenge questions in terms of what are the steps? Like, what are the bottlenecks? Is there a way to rethink the process? And then is there a process? Are the processes that are even needed in the first place? We also ask the teams to be super clear on the business outcomes they want to drive and how to measure those outcomes. And so for finance team, it could be like the number of days to close the book, the time it takes to develop a forecast. For sales team, it could be like the average time to contract. Or I think for customer service, it could be like the customer experience rating. And so one thing I want to call out is like you can see at this stage, we are very much focused on what the process is and then what the outcomes are. We haven't even touched the technology stack yet. I also want to call out that I think outcome can be different from goals. I think we realized in the past that we spend too much time debating like how can we drive kind of a 2 to 3% saving, like is it 3% or 5%? But I think what we've learned is really like, especially when it comes to AI-enabled projects, it's important to just not overthink and just go ahead and do it. Partially because the technology is kind of evolving so quickly. And then the other part, as I will touch on later, is that I think for any AI projects, we are kind of trying to foster this like fail fast, like iterate quickly type of culture. And then the last thing I will kind of touch on this slide is that, as I mentioned earlier, we start with the issue and the desired outcome. We map out the process. We redesign the ideal process, and that tech enablement piece is the last step. And so depending on what problem you are trying to solve, whether it's like invoice automation or like streamlining your customer service, like there are plenty of technology vendors out there. But it's important to kind of really identify like what the problem statement is first. And all of that is not really a one and done process. As I mentioned, we are constantly learning. So hopefully, as you can see on the slide, like kind of in this cycle that we are going through, we do kind of have this continuous learning where we hopefully, as the technology evolves, we will continue to drive better and better outcomes. On this next slide, this is sort of a cheat sheet, if you will, for CFOs and finance leaders when it comes to how to identify areas where we have opportunities to drive value with AI. And so self-service, I think that's a pretty straightforward one. A lot of times, like it's the things that you can get straight out of the box, whether it's with Microsoft's Co-Pilot or like ChatGPT or other financial assistants. Multiple handoffs. So within our company, we have a matrix system or matrix organization. So everything is a handoff. Every decision we make, there are 12 people that get to vote. And so those handoffs tend to lead to a lot of inefficiencies. And that's naturally an area where we can target to drive better value. Cost that scale with volume. So I think service and customer support, there are really good examples there. Multiple system of records. I think we've all experienced how like every finance team, sales team, marketing team, they all have multiple systems. And so it's really hard to bring them together. So there's an opportunity to leverage AI to harmonize the data and then find a way to really connect the dots and extract more value from the data. Bottleneck, which I kind of spoke about earlier, we are now mapping out every part of the process and identifying what are the major bottlenecks and see what we can do and improve that bottleneck with technology. It is really hard to do, but that's kind of really where we've seen the most savings and improved value. Low utilization. I'll give some examples later on. We are an engineering company, so we build to the peak, which means at any point of time, we do have some excess capacity. And so that's kind of another area where we can leverage AI to come up with solutions on how do we better serve our customers and optimize our assets. Information retrieval. So a simple question like, do you know this number? Sometimes it requires 7 people to touch it. So how do we leverage AI to automate that? And then complex contractual arrangements. And so how do we kind of leverage AI to really accelerate the way we review contracts and then automate some of the process heavy stuff. And so I'm not going to touch on like this next 2 slides too much. These are really kind of just to give some examples of like the processes and tasks that we've identified across the company in each function where we saw an opportunity to leverage AI. And then I think on this kind of next slide, this is kind of an example of like earlier when I talk about measurable outcomes. What are like some of the KPIs and things that we care about when we kind of evaluate whether technology or AI specifically is helping us getting to that better customer outcome. On this next slide, so I did want to put things into more practical terms. And so these are just some of the real life examples of AI-enabled projects we've had over the past 12 months to give a sense of kind of like what's really possible. So I'm not going to go into the details of every single project, but the first one on the left, this is where we leverage Co-Pilot for Service, which is actually a product that we have at Microsoft to improve our customer experience with our support function. So our engineering leader actually sat down to observe the process. The team designed what an improved experience will look like and tested on a smaller scale in parallel before cutting over. And so like the 2 areas where we saw the biggest improvement was really agent routing. How do you connect your customers to the agent that's best suited to support the case faster, and then as well as the average handling time. The second example here is quote to cash. So this is not my area of expertise necessarily, but it's always a great example when we share kind of our journey with our customers. And so this is a really great example of how AI can really help significantly improve our finance operations. Again, really significant improvement in the quote to close and the reduction in handling time. And the last one is just an example of how we can leverage generative AI for resource allocation decisions and improve our capacity utilization. So earlier, as I mentioned, for all of our data centers, we build to the peak. And so that does mean that at any point of time, we have data center that's underutilized. And so with AI, we were able to analyze historical data across our entire assets to see how we can improve the utilization rates. And so the outcome here is that we are able to serve our customers better with more reliability, but also at the same time, it did lead to cost saving for us since we are making better utilization of our assets. Again, not gonna drain this slide either, but these are just some like even more examples of like some of the projects we drove specifically within finance with AI and some of the results and the impact that we've seen. One of the common questions that we always get is like, what are some of the areas within finance where you've seen kind of the highest ROI? We did have some calculations around that. That being said, I think as I mentioned earlier, given kind of the mindset shift that we are trying to make around like not being too short-sighted and focus on a single ROI number or kind of the payback period and really focusing on the outcomes, we don't tend to kind of evaluate where we need to kind of invest based on that. But I will say like for the most part, I would say any time where we have very kind of process heavy, like repeatable transactional work. That's where we've seen a lot of kind of payback through our AI projects. And that's also where we've seen the quickest return. And so whether it's like quote to cash, I think some of the contract reviews as within our risk compliance function, and then procure to pay. So like those are some like the really great examples. I would say when it comes to like financial planning analysis, kind of how do we leverage AI to better kind of generate insights. Those are kind of the areas where we are still experimenting. So that's sort of where we are in terms of like AI projects within Microsoft Finance.